So any conversation we have about DEI, we have to face the reality of what happens to Black Americans who apply for jobs, which I think is the source of the problem the left was pretending to try to solve with their terrible solutions. About 48% of candidates who have similar resumes, if the name sounds white versus the name sounding Black, a Black sounding name has half as likely to get a call for a job interview. There's also been research that has shown for those who do get called in for an interview, when researchers actually watch their interviews and the interviewees were rated, they were still half as likely to get called back if they actually had the interview. We also have some other statistics where 48% of Black men and 36% of Black women report some kind of racism or discrimination within the workplace. So these statistics illustrate that, yes, we do have a problem with racism in these large corporations, and this is something that needs to be addressed. I should say, as a conservative movement, we're not looking for solutions for this, but we are doing a really good job of attacking the Democrats for their incredibly evil and racist solutions. These corporations on diversity, equity, and inclusion were attempting, or at least on the surface, to try to solve this problem. And it's an important problem. These are things people should be talking about, and these are conversations that we should be having. But what's the left's answer to that? Let's make white people stand up in a cultural sensitivity training seminar, and let's have them apologize for being white. Does that solve anything? That's crazy. They were just creating a new form of racism, and this is what's happening. You have people at Coca-Cola who were told to be less white. Like, what does that mean? Be less white? How can you be less white? It's incredibly frustrating because we do need to have conversations about race and racism in our society, but we have less racism now than we've ever had. Obviously, corporate America is where the real problems are. Okay. And so corporate America now spends $8 billion per year on these diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. And these trainings have only marginalized white people, made them apologize for being white, and taught them how to check their privilege as white people. Now, I don't think that's the solution. The answer to racism is not more racism, and you shouldn't be afraid to talk about that on the campaign. But when you're getting involved in having these conversations with voters or on the media, you need to address the statistics that I mentioned before, because there is something that needs to be addressed. There is something that can be done. Creating anti-white policies is not the solution. The policies that they're trying to put in place to marginalize the white majority is simply a reflection of our changing demographics. It's an opportunity, while it's early, to try to promote certain colors over others. And this is why we go from diversity, equity, and inclusion into another thing called intersectionality. If you haven't heard of intersectionality, this is when someone is rated for their levels of oppression. So if you're Black and transgender or gay and you're from this community, you've got all these layers of oppression, and you get scored based on your layers of oppression. The unoppressed in these calculations, the only people who are not oppressed are white males. Now, white women have been living it up pretty good with their evil white men, right, in this scenario. So I don't know why they get a pass in this at all, but they do somehow. They've managed to get a pass in this. These policies are really just another way to use race and minority as privilege, to continue the existing structure of racism that has failed American society, and to just switch who the privileged are. And that's what's really happening. So if you're white and you're watching this and you think something is amiss, it's just not right, what's going on? That's what it is. They're just trying to use race as privilege. And unfortunately, the chicken is just coming home to roost, because this is what generations of Americans have learned from you. And that's the cold truth. They have learned that race is privilege in America because of our history. And I think there's a lot of people who don't want to abandon that, but they want to embrace it because of the privilege that you get. It didn't survive in America for so long because it didn't work. It survived because it did. And that's why we have to work so hard together against it. We can't recreate Jim Crow racism and put whites at the bottom and blacks on top. And that's what a lot of people want to do. But some of these liberal whites want to ride along with it. They want to ride along with it by being gay. They want to ride along with it by being transgender. They're along for the ride because they want to be scored so that in the new order, they too have a place in the minority rulership. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, and I don't mean to sound like a certain InfoWars host, but this is how it looks to me. And I worry about this. And this is something you should be worried about as well. And we need to have a way to talk about it on the campaign trail, but we also need a way to address the initial statistics that I discussed earlier, because we need a conservative solution to what the Democrats are trying to do with Marxism and racism and continuing our institution and perpetuating institutional racism against whites, because that's a very dangerous thing for our society as a whole to embrace. We have to say no to it, and we need to fight it. But that also means we need conservative solutions. So some things that jumped out at me I thought were really interesting is, as far as corporate America goes, they were talking about removing the names of schools and generating numbers instead of names on resumes so that people were getting called back because they were qualified. That makes sense to me, since people sitting in human resources at these big corporations are unable to look past the racially preferred. That may be a solution that corporate America can adopt to solve this problem without making all the white employees stand up and apologize for their privilege. Another thing we can do is recognize that within the workplace, and for those people who work there, if they report incidents of racial discrimination, that there's people they can talk to. But there are already laws on the books that protect me and protect you from racism. We've got the Civil Rights Act, and I believe it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Act that already protects us. So we don't need new laws or new rules, nor for corporate America to subjugate whites to segregation. We don't need our kids, and this is happening across America as these schools are adopting these practices, having white elementary school kids stand up and apologize for being white. They just see their neighbors as their neighbors. They're not, these white kids today aren't being taught to be racist like their grandparents were. This is not the same America that my father was born into, and we certainly don't want to pretend that it is. Being a black conservative, and sometimes I can identify as black because my father's black and my mother's white. So I do sometimes apologize to myself in a mirror and cry liberal tears about how I've oppressed myself. Is an opportunity for us as a conservative movement to try to address these issues the Republican way. We can do this. We need to stop being afraid to talk about it. And my white Republican friends need to stop being a talk about it. I had a conversation with a fellow the other day who informed me that he didn't understand why black people were complaining, and it was hard to be sympathetic with them, because how could you sympathize with a wealthy black man who's a millionaire because he's been playing in sports, talking about how he's oppressed? And I thought about that, and it's like, well, he's how many black CEOs are there? How many times did that black kid go into a class, and was he encouraged to be a mathematician or a chemist? It doesn't happen. But black kids are seen as good athletes, and then that's all that's pushed on them. And at some point, our society looked at these black kids and says, you know what? You'd be a great athlete. Leave the thinking to us. That's just the way it is. And it has to stop. But when we're going to be talking about DEI, try to be more open-minded when we have these conversations, and to understand that the left, although they did it in an evil Marxist way, we're trying to address real problems. And if we're going to get rid of DEI, which we should because it's racist and it's wrong, we have to have our own solutions. So good luck on the campaign.